Welcome back to FraudCast. I'm genuinely privileged to have Jeremy Moller on the show with me today. Thank you. It's a distinct pleasure. I honestly, I don't know if Jeremy needs any introduction in the AML community. We often kind of refer to you as the godfather of AML, affectionately, of course. But you've had such a presence, such an influence, particularly in Tranche 2 over the last couple of years. You've been advocating and influencing and helping so many understand what's to come. And now we're live. So thank you for being on the show. It's a great pleasure to have you here.
No, great to be here. I appreciate it.
It's been a long time coming, but now we're here. We're ready. We're live. Every real estate, every accountant, every lawyer in the country now needs to abide by this reform. You have toured the Tranche.
Yeah.
Over the last couple of years, you have been out there speaking at numerous events and attempting to educate, advise, counsel, influence to ensure that those affected are best prepared for what's to come. Before we get on to what we can expect from here, did you meet a lot of friction? I guess that's my first. You've spoken to so many. Was there a lot of negative commentary, or were people open to the fact that this is potentially an opportunity for us to do good work?
Well, I'll take it even back a step to that, right? So I had my visa in the UK for 2 years, expired 2 days after the Rugby World Cup final in 2015 as planned. Very glad that the All Blacks won that. But I had a very forward-thinking boss. Yeah. It's been a while since a win, so hopefully next year here in Sydney. So I actually had a very forward-thinking boss who moved me out to Australia 10 years ago for Tranche 2. And Colin, if you think people are struggling to understand it now, imagine what it was like 10 years ago. So I actually had to try and explain to people often what anti-money laundering is, what AML is. But more than that, particularly in a law firm in a place like Australia, it just wasn't a thing back then, locally. So it's been a very big education journey. I often joke that, when I got here, I obviously was an Australian citizen, but it's been 10 years and now I am. So it's, been that long. And typical lawyer, right, my career is almost linked then to a piece of legislation which passed in 2024 with the changes to the AML Act. But those early days in 2015, the lack of knowledge was great, and it's really good to see that it's growing. But a lot of what's happened there is with the regulatory action. So the more active steps the regulator has taken in relation to Tranche 1, so entities like banks, casinos and others, it's obviously made the wider market more aware of that. So as we've got closer to 1 July this year, obviously lawyers, accountants and real estate have become more aware, but I think just it being in the paper over the last few years has kind of raised awareness. Whether that means, people are ready for tangible compliance and have full knowledge around it, that will only come in time. But I think there's been growing awareness, but it's definitely been a challenge. To the other part of your question, going around the country, we sometimes sit here in Sydney and we have a particular view of the world. We have to recognise, Australia is a very big place, but also how business is done. So you think of a small local town, you might have 2 lawyers, a conveyancer, a couple of accountants, and a real estate agent. So a lot of people are actually going to know the people specifically that they're dealing with. So you have to think some of that around customer due diligence and actually how you approach it. But we're often dealing with large corporates here, may have complex structures. You're not going to know everybody individually that you deal with. So you've got to think about how this applies across the country as well, and a multitude of views around that.
Do you see this, because you will have seen how New Zealand tackled it, how the UK tackled this and implemented it. Do you believe that there's an opportunity here for Australia to, I mean, it's crass to say learn from someone else's mistakes, but an opportunity to be like a leader in this space?
I think often when you do something towards the end, we're one of the last countries in the world to do this. What helps is, as you say, you can learn from the mistakes, but it's about doing it better and more efficiently. So I actually think over compliance or spending more and more time on compliance doesn't necessarily result in better outcomes. It's about an intelligence regime. So if you focus on the true purpose of why we do it, we'll often have better outcomes. We're trying to identify who the potential criminals are, report that as appropriate, and then close the gaps once we see them, right? But if you're just doing compliance for compliance sake, that is a problem.
Yeah.
And like I often joke, you have it's a fictitious client, but this is the way I frame it. The client says to me, oh, we collect all of this customer due diligence. And I say, well, what do you do with that? And they're like, oh, no, we just collect it. We don't look at it, right?
Yeah.
And the whole point is what you do with it that matters. So I think the big thing is trying to make sure we don't have too much red tape, but actually innovate around what we're doing. And a big part of that is technology, but I think it's about the community as well. We know that we need to fight the ever increasing crime that's out there, but doing it in a practical, open way, information sharing subject to certain legal and other privacy controls. But I think we have to be proactive. So when you learn from those jurisdictions, don't do the years of just doing things for the sake of doing it,
Yeah.
or doing it in a cumbersome way. Let's think about how we can, bring this into the new age. And that's why I think looking at countries like the UK and New Zealand, it provides a bit of a kind of step by step, but we're able to jump ahead as a consequence.
And do you think that anyone working in financial crime would, maybe it's a generalization, would think that we can combat it, but we can never get ahead. However much we do, these guys committing these crimes are always feel like they're one step ahead. Is there a world where we can get ahead of financial criminals, or do you feel that they will always be one step ahead?
I think they will always be one step ahead, but we're closely behind, if that makes sense. The very AI tools that criminals will use around identity theft, dealing with bots and other things like that, masking payments. These are the very things that we will sometimes use to counteract it, right? How we look at transactions, how we verify identity. So often we're learning from the criminals, but I think we have to try and as much as possible bring that into real time. So that goes back to information sharing again. When we know there are good controls that deter the criminals, we should be working with the Financial Intelligence Unit, the regulator, law enforcement, but other reporting entities to put these in place, right? But if you think about just real estate as an example in terms of Tranche 2, because of the lack of regulation to date across anti-money laundering, that would have been more of a gap. Now you've got the conveyancers looking at it, you've got the lawyers looking at it, you've got the accountants, you've got the real estate agents. You always had the banks looking at it from a transaction side and people providing the mortgages. But all of a sudden, when you look at real estate, it's not as good area now to think about laundering your funds. So these are the types of things we have to put in place. But again, it's what you do that matters. So we've actually got to go beyond just the mere running the searches, doing the checks. What's the behavioural stuff we're seeing, right? Is something like a property being sold under market value, in an extreme sense, or over market value? Could it be a way to move funds quickly and then move it offshore? Is it being done through complex structures, through many low transparency jurisdictions where money can be moved? So it's all of these things, but it's often building a picture. But when you think about technology, and it will be the great challenge of our age, we've got to think about how we can harness that as much as possible. One of the ones I've seen really interesting from like a banking and sort of scams perspective is actually using people that would otherwise been doing scamming to scam the scammers. To actually have somebody who's that fake customer dealing with a scammer to take up their time, as an example. So you build a bot that can interact with that person. So they're scamming somebody that doesn't exist. So you actually make it in a way less productive for them, and that slows the criminal down, right?
Yeah. You've heard it all. You've spoken to all these audiences. What can they expect in the next 6 to 12 months in terms of rolling this out and in terms of implementing it into their organization?
Yeah, a lot of learning, right? So 1 July is just the commencement of this. You're not going to be perfect when you start with this. It's an evolving process. You're going to have a lot more data points. How many high-risk customers do you have? How many politically exposed persons? How many people try to deal with you and then disappear all of a sudden because it may have been a criminal element? So it's a huge amount of learning and a huge amount of data. So you got to feed that data back into a future risk assessment around what you do. I also think it's trying to look further at what these typologies actually are. So what are the true money laundering ways that it occurs, and actually trying to better understand that without the regulation it's been hard to date. It's a little bit theoretical, right? You say this is how we think they're going to be moving money through your organization, but until you actually see it in real time, it's harder to understand. So I think that will be the main learning. It's also getting the word out to your staff and other people, right? How do you actively train people? And how do you actually make them care? So
That's the care factor.
one of the biggest risks is apathy, right?
Yeah.
If people don't care about it, that's the person who may be processing the transaction. Oh, it looked a little bit dirty, but I processed it anyway. We'll lodge a suspicious matter report, maybe. But you've got to truly think about whether you deal with that customer in future and how you limit the risk of, potential crime occurring. But yeah, apathy is a big part of it. But I have a huge sympathy also for Tranche 2 entities, right? We are really busy. I mean, lawyers, heavily regulated, as are those other sectors. How do you find the time in the day, right? Technology keeps on expanding. There's only so many hours we actually have to do things.
That's right.
So it's a real challenge for people. And part of that's also been mental health, right? I've spoken a bit about this recently as I've gone around the country. We've had so much to do for 1 July that it could really stress people out, right? But once we get beyond 1 July, the most important date after that, 2 July.
Yeah.
And then 3 July. So you've got to put it into practice. So I'm slightly nervous about this run up because I think there's so much emphasis on trying to get everything done. That is really important, but then it becomes even more important how we deal with counterparties, with our client, with customers, so that we can actually try and limit this. But it's been a lot of work for a lot of people, number of tired people, but we'll learn a lot once we get beyond this period.
And probably none more so than you. I'd say you haven't slept in a year and a half. But again, I don't want to go back to previous lives, but as you say, every day is going to matter and what counts. If we went back to when this was implemented in New Zealand, when you were there, governing body didn't come down hard on day one, right? There was an empathy, and there was an element of intelligence used to see, are you doing a good job in operationalizing this or making this part of your day-to-day?
One of my greatest fears in terms of recruitment and getting personnel into the sector is if we do actually come down to hard on individuals and people who are trying to do the right thing.
Never want to do it.
We need so many good AML compliance officers. So one of the things I think it's important, and this has happened in other jurisdictions as well, you often need to see the regulator and the financial intelligence unit as a partner with the regulated population. So where I'm often advising my clients is, how do you build actually a really good relationship with the regulator? And part of that is telling them the good things you're doing, but the problems you're seeing, so you can work on it together. I think the challenge with regulation sometimes is because there's fines and there's a fear of dealing with the regulator, we avoid them.
That's it.
But that's what sometimes leads to those challenges. So what I think you can learn from other jurisdictions is actually having a really good relationship with the regulator. And that's also been true of Tranche 1 entities here in Australia. But I think we need to try and actually build that community better and understand that.
Yeah.
So the very moment that you feel challenged by something, it's not to pull away from the regulator, but actually trying to lean in, because you're all trying to meet the same ultimate aim, which is combating crime.
Very good. Very good.